Welcome to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries, where legends never sleep. Welcome to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. Tonight, we follow a trail that begins not in space, but in a darkened editing room. It winds through NASA's vaults, Stanley Kubrick's sound stages, and the strange absence of a few missing frames, fragments of film that were said to have captured something no one was ever meant to see. This is the story of the missing frames of Kubrick's moon. It begins, as many conspiracies do, with coincidence. In the late 1960s, while NASA was preparing to land Apollo 11 on the moon, Stanley Kubrick was finishing 2001, A Space Odyssey. The film premiered more than a year before the moon landing, but its visuals, the lunar surface, the movement of astronauts, the weightless camera work, were so convincing that people wondered how a man could capture on film what humanity had not yet witnessed in reality. Kubrick, obsessed with authenticity, had spent years consulting astronomers, physicists, and engineers, including some who had direct ties to NASA. He had access to top-secret imagery from early space missions, and even filmed portions of 2001 using a modified lens designed for low-light conditions, the same type later used by the US military. To make the impossible believable, Kubrick created his own world, and in doing so, he may have blurred the line between cinema and government secrecy. The theory that Kubrick helped fake the moon landing didn't emerge until years later, whispered through counterculture newsletters and underground radio in the 1970s. It began with odd overlaps, technicians who claimed to have worked both at NASA and on Kubrick's sets, strange equipment orders that appeared on both government and studio manifests, and the eerie resemblance between the lunar landscapes of 2001 and the footage broadcast from the Sea of Tranquility. But like all good myths, this one has a shadow, a missing piece that keeps the story alive. In this case, it was the missing film stock. After the release of 2001, Kubrick ordered all original negatives of certain unused lunar sequences to be sealed and stored in his private archive. Years later, during a studio transfer, archivists discovered that several reels, containing experimental test shots of lunar lighting and motion, were missing. According to a 1978 internal inventory note, those frames were withdrawn by the director for private study. But no record exists of where they went, or if they were ever returned. Those reels would become the centerpiece of a conspiracy that still flickers through late-night forums and fringe documentaries, that Kubrick, under contract with NASA, had used the same film techniques to stage portions of the Apollo footage, and that the missing frames contained evidence of that collaboration. But this story is not about whether the moon landing was faked. It's about why so many believe it could have been. To understand that, we need to step back into the cultural landscape of 1968. America was bleeding. Vietnam, assassinations, civil unrest. The world had begun to doubt the images on its television screens. Then Kubrick released a film that made the impossible look real, while the government promised a reality that looked impossible. Both were acts of faith, one artistic, one political. And somewhere in that overlap, suspicion was born. Decades later, technicians re-examining NASA's early Apollo tapes noticed something odd, a brief gap in one of the mission reels, corresponding to less than a second of missing footage. Officially, it was a splice error during duplication. Unofficially, it became fuel. Some claimed that gap matched the exact frame rate of Kubrick's 70mm film experiments. And then came the testimonies. A man calling himself Bill Kay, a supposed cameraman for 2001, claimed in a 1995 interview that Kubrick was approached by NASA officials who admired his realism and wanted his technical advice. He alleged that Kubrick, in principle, agreed not to fake an entire landing, but to film a backup sequence in case transmission failed. According to Kay, the footage was shot on a closed London set under immense secrecy and delivered to NASA via military courier. Mainstream historians dismissed the story immediately, but the strangest part is that Kay described in vivid detail a particular lighting setup using front projection screens and lunar dust mixtures that no one outside the crew would have known about at the time. That method would not become public knowledge until years later, when behind-the-scenes footage surfaced. And then there's the light itself. Cinematographers still debate it. The soft, shadowless glow on the lunar surface in both 2001 and Apollo 11. In space, sunlight is harsh and direct. Yet in those images, the shadows appear diffused, as if lit through atmosphere. Was it simply reflected light from the moon's surface, or a carefully arranged studio trick? Physicists argue for the former. Conspiracy theorists whisper the latter. Kubrick, famously private, never commented. But the mystery deepens, not in what we can see, but what's gone. In the 1980s, when Kubrick's estate was preparing material for a documentary retrospective, archivists catalogued every reel of his existing work, except for the missing lunar test footage. An assistant editor reportedly found a metal canister, mislabeled B-roll 2001, Moon Tester 7, in a private storage facility. When opened, it contained blank film, no images, just the faint smell of developer. The edges were intact, but the emulsion had been deliberately stripped. Was it a prank, an accident, or an intentional erasure? A few years later, another rumor emerged that Kubrick, haunted by guilt, destroyed the missing reels himself before his death in 1999. He had, after all, a lifelong obsession with control. To Kubrick, unfinished work was a form of imperfection. If those test shots had become myth, perhaps destruction was the final edit. But others believe those frames were never destroyed at all. They point to a curious entry in NASA's 1972 asset registry. Film negatives, optical reference/contractor K, no first name, no address, no follow-up. In the years since, analysts have noted that Kubrick's later films, The Shining, Eyes Wide Shut, are filled with cryptic imagery that some interpret as confessions. Danny Torrance wearing an Apollo 11 sweater. The impossible geometry of the Overlook Hotel, like a studio built over truth. The motif of hidden rooms and red hallways, echoing the isolation of secret work. Kubrick's defenders say it's coincidence. Others insist it's message in code. But let's return to the core of the myth, the missing frames. What might they have shown? Conspiracy believers claim they contained early composites, astronauts moving across a simulated lunar surface, with Earth rising on a projected backdrop. Others think it was something far stranger, not faked footage, but evidence of an anomaly captured during testing, an unexplained flicker or light that Kubrick couldn't explain. They point to a quote attributed to Kubrick's longtime collaborator, cinematographer Jeffrey Unsworth. He filmed something he couldn't reproduce, and it frightened him. Skeptics dismiss that entirely, noting that Unsworth died in 1978, long before these claims appeared. But myths persist, not because they are true, but because they feel true. Kubrick once said, "The truth of a thing is in the feel of it, not the think of it." And perhaps that's what the moon landing conspiracy really reflects. Not a lie, but a longing. the wish that reality could be directed, framed, lit, and made perfect, that the chaos of existence could be reduced to 24 frames per second. Maybe those missing frames are a metaphor, the gap between what humanity wants to believe and what it can prove, the hole in the real where meaning leaks through. Still, fragments resurface. In 2016, a private collector in Los Angeles auctioned a single frame of 70mm film, allegedly from Kubrick's lunar tests. The image, if genuine, showed a barren surface lit from multiple angles, something no real lunar landscape could produce. Experts dismissed it as a replica. But before the auction closed, the frame vanished from the listing. The seller withdrew it by request. Even now, deep in NASA's archive in Greenbelt, Maryland, catalog numbers remain redacted. Somewhere, perhaps, a canister sits misfiled among lunar telemetry reels, unmarked, unremarkable, holding nothing but silence. Or maybe Kubrick did what all great directors eventually do, cut the scene that told too much. And yet, we can't help but look for it. Maybe that's what all conspiracies are. Human longing projected onto absence. The belief that somewhere, behind the curtain, there's an explanation grand enough to justify our curiosity. When you strip away the shadows, the missing frames, and the paranoia, what remains is this: a director who reached beyond human imagination, a nation desperate to prove its reach, and a piece of film that might, or might not, have ever existed. But what if it did? Imagine, for a moment, that Kubrick did film something that never should have been seen. Not a hoax, not an actor in a suit, but something real. Something that flickered in the studio lights. A pattern, a movement, a reflection that no one could explain. Would you keep it, or would you destroy it? Kubrick once called 2001 a non-verbal experience. Maybe that's what those frames were. Too pure, too ambiguous, too close to truth to be spoken of. Perhaps the missing frames were never about deception, but revelation. Perhaps, as the film burned and light hit celluloid, it showed us something humanity wasn't ready to understand. A glimpse of ourselves reflected on the moon. Because in the end, every reel is missing frames, every truth has cuts, and every myth begins in the dark. This was The Missing Frames of Kubrick's Moon. Thank you for watching Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. If tonight's story drew you in, remember, the truth may be in the reel that's never shown. Subscribe and join us again next time as we uncover another secret hidden in the flicker between frames.
I've been running old film through my hands. Every frame a promise I can't stand. They say truth is what the camera sees, but you can fake almost anything with ease. Dust in the gate, a splice too clean. Looks like faith on a movie screen. The sound cuts out, but the mouth still moves. Guess belief don't need much proof. I see the light, but it's burning too near. Looks like heaven, but it hums like fear. There's something missing in the real tonight. A line we cross between wrong and right. We built a dream with steady hands, then lost ourselves in what we planned. If truth is real, it hides between Every lie we tell's a world we made. I watched your eyes in the monitor glow. Half of you there, half of you gone below. The set went dark, but the air stayed still. A little too quiet, a little too real. We both looked down and no one spoke. The perfect scene had finally broke. I see the light, but it flickers wrong. We're both in the picture, but we don't belong. There's something missing in the real tonight. A line we cross between wrong and right. We built a dream with steady hands, then lost ourselves in what we planned. If truth is real, it hides between the missing frames we'll never see. Maybe ours just a safer lie. We build a world, then say goodbye. You called it craft, I called it sin. We looped the tape and watched again. There's something missing in the real tonight. A spark we lost.